Hey, what's up everybody? Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics. Welcome back. So I'm finishing up the artwork on this Diablo 3 piece. This was a request on my Patreon, so keep in mind that you can support me on my Patreon and get access to art files like this with layers and notes and whatever you really request that you want to learn about each project as I complete them. Okay, so on this one, what I want to show you today is kind of like how I'm texturing the armor right there. And as you notice, it's still a bit foggy and a bit loose with the sketch lines. And I want to kind of explain how to avoid that. Something that I probably should have done in this piece, and it would have saved a tremendous amount of time. So I'll kind of share that with you as I detail some of this. So you see that the gauntlet here, whatever that is, isn't quite as detailed as maybe the shoulder piece. So I want to show you a couple quick ways to kind of affect that work and move through it. Now, one of which, if you're trying to get rid of the lines, one thing I recommend doing is actually making the lines a lot thinner. So what I did here is I kind of sketched a little bit too much and I left my lines a bit too thick. So what ends up happening when I merge that line work down, which I probably shouldn't have, but I'm used to doing that in my work, and that's okay for most pieces, but what will happen is if you got a lot of line weight or you've got something that's a bit more detailed, you're going to spend a lot of time painting over or smudging lines if you want a pretty refined look. You know, if you're not too worried about it, then I guess it's not that big of a deal, but I want this to look pretty good. I've already spent a good amount of time in it, so I want to get rid of some of these little artifacts. Now there's a couple ways to do that, one of which you can kind of blur the work. One thing that I generally will do is try to get the edge of the work as tight as possible, then lock transparency so now I can get into the edge and blend at least the edge line work off a bit quicker without worrying about being destructive to the edge of the design. So that's one way you can kind of approach that aspect of it. Okay, so you can keep smudging up the edges, pushing them back like that. Sometimes if you get kind of a weird artifact, maybe it wasn't completely solid when you locked the transparency. So what I'll do is take that off, grab a paintbrush, select the nearby color, and then just refine it that way. And why is that coming out so dark? Oh, I got it set to multiply. So another thing that I do, and that's something else I wanted to talk about anyways, so I'll kind of segue into that, is I also use blending modes on the brushes quite a bit. You can do this with layers and or the blending mode up here. So what I'll tend to do is say I grab this darker tone and I set this to multiply. I can kind of get in here and noodle around and add some detail and give it kind of that weathered look. But it gives this real nice darkened effect. What's neat about using multiply, I think, is that when you add darkened effects, it'll darken all throughout. It'll leave a little bit, I guess it'll darken everything together, but it just gives a little bit more of an effect to it, I guess. I guess I look at it like this. When you use normal mode, it'll cover up certain aspects of the artwork, but when you use multiply, it doesn't. It just deepens everything without covering up some of that other texture. So it'll darken the darks, and it'll also, it's hard to explain. Let me just try to illustrate it. Let's go to the soft brush, set the multiply. So I'm going to do a pass right through here. Let me grab something with a little bit more of a color. I think that'll help. So something a little bit into the lighter tone. See how it still darkens it. Okay, now if we set that to normal, see how it washes it out with that new color. So that's just something that I think helps, you know, because I'm always trying to darken up things and bring out bits of texture. Now likewise, it works with, I'll use color dodge or overlay sometimes, but color dodge, and I'll use one of these lighter tones and I'll punch up a light source really quickly like that. So that's another thing, and you can use that in conjunction. Well, she's on her own layer, so I can literally, oh sorry, I guess I can't, I'm out of it today. You got to lock transparency first and then come across there and see how it just hits that edge. So using these blending modes with the brushes is really powerful and really important to do. And you know, you don't really want to pass. I wouldn't say I'd want to hit the highlight quite that strong. I probably would just want to hit little areas of it at first. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll use this just to find a color. I've talked about that a lot in other videos where I'll use this to kind of just find a highlight color that I like against this material. You know, because you can play with this, but and then I'll just basically switch to a paintbrush, set to normal mode maybe, or you know, variety of different things, but and then I'll select from that new color and then maybe paint with it. So I kind of do that as well. So I just mix it up a lot. The other thing that I find myself doing a lot in paintings like this is trying to rough up the edge a bit. So what I'll do is I'll take the light source, I'll kind of dance around the edge of it. Let me get rid of this black edge here. I don't think that would be there. And make sure I'm still on light transparency. Kind of round that around the corner here a little bit. And then I'll take that light transparency off. I want the little kind of bump there from the material or the metal kind of going around the bend of the shoulder. So give it a little bit more depth there. So like that. Light transparency again. But what I'll do is I'll kind of roughen up the edge, even with the highlights or the shadows, especially with the shadows. So after I get enough of this out of there, and I'll start selecting more and more from my painting as I get enough of this information in place. So I'll hold Alt, select. I'm toggling the brushes back and forth with the bracket keys. Just trying to figure out how much of this line I want to get out of there. So again, I would really suggest when you go to create your line, if you're the type of artist that creates line work first before you start painting, make sure to make those lines really thin. Once you have it defined, you can use heavy line weight at first for your sketching and kind of getting ideas in place, I think. But then after you really know what you want to see in your painting, go back and do that finalized line work and do them very thin. So that was my mistake here, and I wanted to show you that because I think it's really important to show you the mistakes I make as well as the success stories, because I don't want you to just think that I'm always not that I think my art's so fantabulous, but I don't want you to always think that I'm just creating amazing art and I'm just happy with everything I do. That's not how we grow as artists. I grow the same way that you grow, and that's finding mistakes in my work. And this is one I was looking at, kind of kicking myself. I'm like, you know what? I got to share that as well. I can't just make it always sound like I just know what I'm doing, because sometimes I'm just fumbling around like we all are. So. But that's how we learn. So it's cool to kind of rejoice in that process. All right, so essentially, get enough of this in, but let me show you how I'd weather up the edges a bit. So I kind of did it down here a bit, where I'll take the darker tone and I'll go right to the very edge of some of this, and I'll just kind of picture that, this material's been beat up and it's been kicked around and slashed, and, you could put like a nice dark kind of groove in the material, then take a light source on the one side of it, and pretty quickly you can make some kind of like, little indent right there. Actually, I think I'll leave that. It should probably round over right here though. So let me try to get that to show the depth of that piece. So yeah, so just a shadow on one side. You can sometimes put a shadow kind of in bits and pieces of the other side, but predominantly you just want on the one side to kind of show that depth. And then even in there, you can take and kind of separate a little bit of that, so you can make like a thicker part and a thinner part. It's real important, because what happens is you're showing that you're being aware that things aren't just all clean and pristine and straight across. They're weathered, they're beat up, they're nicked up and things like that. So you want to get some of that as much as possible in your illustration work. I'm probably a little bit too close to the rendering right now. So you got to be a little bit careful of that. So let me pull back and make sure it's reading well. And yeah, see, I think that little slash mark, isn't too distracting. That's the other thing you want to be careful of, is that these effects don't become, unrealistic in the proportion to the surrounding areas of the painting. So that all of a sudden, if I did this slash and it was a distraction, then I need to get rid of it, versus it just being a nice subtle addition to the work. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this back to multiply. And what I want to do, I was noticing this more from a distance, the light source on this shoulder doesn't look as correct as I'd like it to. So I'm going to try to shade up a little bit right here. I'm going to put a little bit more of this in shadow. So I'm just using a really soft brush and just kind of maneuvering around it and trying to round out this form. I think the light source is way too strong right here. I'll paint that back. So some of this helps to do from a distance. I could even come over here and say, okay, a lot of this would be darker, a lot less light source here, things like that. Now, even the breastplate here is kind of not accurate. And then, and then what I do is I use parts of it. So far, the part I like probably the most is the shoulder. So I need the other parts to match. So I just basically will select from that, and a lot of times you don't have to nail these colors identically. I mean, it helps, obviously, if you can get them as close as possible, but they kind of line up. As long as you're selecting from each area of the painting, and if you have a really hard time with that, then just make a separate layer with color swatches. Or I think they even have some pretty neat color swatches with Photoshop there that you can download. If I find out more about that, I'll share them with you guys. Or somebody is welcome to comment in the video, obviously. All right, so let's go back over to here and let's add some of this texture back over into this gauntlet. Now, another way you can blend this stuff out, I've already added some texture, so I don't want to use this effect, but I'll show it to you real quick. You could take and make a selection around areas. I do this kind of like post-processing at the end of my paint work, but I'll show you what I mean. And you can just apply the blend or the Gaussian blur or whatever type of blur you want to use right to that one area. So obviously that's way too much there. And as long as you have transparent pixels locked, it won't blur outside of the edge. So you can basically just soften stuff up on the inside. Now, one way that this is kind of effective is you can go Command-C, Command-Shift-V, lock transparency, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, blur it pretty heavily. We'll say right into here. And what I'm doing is I'm paying attention to the edges of this more than anything else. So we'll say that that's the way I want the edges to work, even though it's not really, but it's pretty close. So what I could do is say, I know it's right over top of the other one that's visibly, not too bad, but I can basically toggle this on and off and see what areas I want to keep. I mainly want to keep some of this texture I've already put in place. So let me just take this with the soft airbrush like this, get in here and just erase some of that. Oh, maybe it's because I got lock transparency on. Yeah, so take lock transparency off just for this part. And so what I'm saying is basically that just allowed me to soften up the edges. So I use this effect, like I said, more post-processing. But what you can do here is you can really control where you want visibility in your paint work. And you can blur just certain components out really quickly. So what I can do here is say, all right, well, at least it saved me some time on softening up the edges. I still got to blur a lot of stuff in here, but I can be a little bit more specific. And so now if I toggle this visibility on and off, I can see that it blurred the line work off the edges for me pretty quickly. So I'll go ahead and hit Command-E and merge that down and just keep working. And it also didn't go outside of any of that edge work. I still have my same lock transparent pixels that I wanted. And I can get back in here and start, blending away. Like this. So I'll keep a little bit of that line work in there, but not much. I pretty much want to blend as much of that out of there as I can and then replace it with just paint work. Now the other way is just to paint over top of these as you go. So you could just go back to whatever brush you like. I use the chalk painter brush for quite a bit. Now for the texture, I'm going to show you a couple other things. Let me set this back to normal. So I might grab a little bit of this light source, punch up some of the bezel as I go here. Grab some of the shadow. So you see that's another way to kind of get rid of the line work as you paint. And then, let me find a little bit brighter light source for just a little glare there. Another thing I'll do is I'll throw these glares in around just to kind of get an idea, even though I might not keep a lot of these. But I think it helps to do some of this early on, just so that you can round out the forms, and you're going to paint over top of this stuff. I think that's really where really good painters get really fast, is they know when to throw the textures in and what stuff's going to get blended back by painting over top. I still got a ways to go to kind of really be comfortable with that, but I think I'm starting to figure it out little by little, So let me show you what I'm using here. I'm using the Smooth Blender for my paint set. You can get that on my Gumroad, by the way. And then also, just so you know, I'm creating a new set for a variety of, more in-depth textures. So that'll be available pretty soon as well. And you guys are welcome to let me know what kind of brushes you'd like to see, what kind of texture brushes, pattern brushes, whatever. And I'll make sure to try to incorporate those. Some of the new ones will be part of this set So if you've already got this set, you'll get an update and get some new brushes with it. I try to do that so I'm not just saying always like, oh, you got to get the new set, you know. So yeah, so back to this. Like if I take, let me get a few more of these glares in. So the other thing is probably makes sense to try to detail as much stuff in a single area, like an entire pass. It's probably arguably the best way to increase speed is to maybe go through the entire painting and add all this. I tend to do one component at a time, and then I step back and kind of look at it, see if it's working well and things like that. Like I could even copy part of what I did over here and then obviously just, you know, almost drag it over and place it over top of this and repaint. But I'm not going to do that. I think I want them to look a little bit lit a little bit differently because I want to show some depth from side to side of the painting. Okay, so now as far as texture, I want to show you how I kind of get stuff like this going. So, and what I've got in the shoulder. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and go select, load selection, hit OK. And you can see that just gives me a nice hard edge selection around the character. I'll add a new layer. Let's go to these brushes here. Let's find something that's got some good grit to it. Let's try, I don't know here, rock texture maybe. Sometimes these rock textures will be kind of nice in there, but it'd need to be more subtle, a lot darker. So let's try something like this. And what this one is at first is a build-up. So what I do is I'll throw some of this in place. Obviously, I don't want her armor to look like a rock, but it's a build-up process. So it's not always, one texture is not always going to do exactly what you want, but you can definitely get some of it in there and add to it. So I'll show you that here in a sec. Okay, so now if I toggle this on and off, so you can see it's added a bit of good texturing to it. Not a lot, but I really like to slowly build up this process so I can get something that looks more enriched like this here. So let's try another one. And you can use, the reason why I created the selection here is I wanted to add layers and also to show you sometimes it's helpful to play with the blending modes as well. So let's just try that a little bit. Let's go ahead and add another layer just to really see where it's going. And let's get in here and find something else. Let's say, let's see here. Not sure what I want to use here. Block texture brush maybe. No, too heavy. Set to normal. No, it's more of a blocked out effect. Hold on one sec. I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's go ahead and grab one of the stipple brushes. Not the stipple blender, but dense stipple. And let's try this at a larger scale. Get some of this in here. And let's even darken this up even further. And sometimes what'll happen, I don't think this one's adding to it as well as I like, but sometimes what'll happen is by building up over top of this, you won't see as much of it as well as you'd think you would, but then as you go back and you use like dodge and burn and some other effects, you'll really bring out some of this. And that's how I got the stuff over here. So I'll show you that. Rippled glass is another good one. I don't know why this tends to do that. Rippled glass should work pretty well. Let's test it over here somewhere where I can see the, yeah, so that's a little bit better. So let's try that. So what this will do is give us some nice kind of grittiness to it, in combination of the other textures that were already put down. And then what I'll do is go back with just a regular brush. And sometimes I might build up layer after layer, but I don't want to bore you with some of that. This is kind of a good starting point. And then what I'll do is go back with a solid brush, and then I'll paint in some of my own stuff. And sometimes I'll just paint in by hand. So keep that in mind. I did a lot of that over there, actually. So some of this is just soft brush, and then some hard brush, where I kind of like try to find these little nicks and dents and I don't know, sometimes it can be a lot of fun just to sit around there and noodle around. But other times you're trying to move faster because you're needing to get a piece out the door or whatever. And that's where texture brushes can really save you some time. Sometimes people will just grab textures from other uh, realistic objects or photos, and I think it's called photo bashing, and they'll throw that together. I don't do much of that, but when it's done really well, it can be highly effective and streamline your work immensely. Like I said, I don't do it too much, so it looks weird when I do it because I don't practice it. But there's some great tutorials on that as well on YouTube and things like that. So just check it out. But yeah, so I'll get in there and just kind of noodle around, find some little pieces. Another thing I try to do is make sure I don't make them all the same. So I don't want to dance around this entire uh, bit of armor and do the same effect. So I'll try to get in here and add some little heavier pieces and really mix it up. I think that's important because if not, you might as well use a brush. You want to do some things that look like they were done by hand. We could also say, okay, this is a bit more of a defense piece on this character. I mean, they all are, it's armor, but maybe she takes a lot more swipes to this, so you could get some of these cracks in here. Select again the light source. Probably pay attention to the way you did the light source on the other one. Doesn't probably have to be identical, but probably helps if it matches a little bit. So get that little scratch in there too. You can also paint back some of this, so like put it in place, but then kind of brush over it just a little bit to tone it back, and then just punch up the light source here and there. So just little things like that, I think, make things look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so now we'll say that that's enough. Let's go ahead and check these layers now and see if it was a good addition. Keep in mind that you can hide the selection with, I believe, Command H. So it's still there, but like if I was to take this, see how it's still in place, but it's just not visible. So actually somebody told me that in the comments of one of these videos. I was pretty excited to learn that. Okay, so if you toggle this on and off, there's the additions to that layer. Toggle this on and off, and this one. So you see it went from a very soft kind of, I don't know, overly airbrushed look and not very detailed to that and then that. So it's starting to get there. So what I generally will do if I like those, and I pretty much do, I'll just select all of them, hit Command E, merge those together. I don't know if my selection's still going. Yeah, I guess it is. Okay, or wait. Yeah, because I don't have lock transparency there, so that's cool. So now let's go ahead and let's add a new layer. And let's try to punch up some of the light source again. So we know that we've got our selection in place. Let's take a little bit of the lighter tone here. Let's go ahead and just set the layer mode right to color dodge. Okay. And let's take a soft brush at first. So we'll just grab this very soft brush and we'll start off with this and see what it does. So a nice overly saturated kind of highlight, which I think I like that. So we'll go ahead and go with it for a little bit. And I think it matches the other gauntlet pretty good. So let's go ahead and pull back a little bit. Yeah, so we've already got that kind of overly saturated red going on, which is really what I wanted to go for anyways. I might add a little bit more to the light source back here, but I wanted that kind of ominous, eerie kind of red light kind of thing going on. So we'll paint some of that in. Now, again, the beauty of doing it this way is that we've got the layer mode as our backup plan. So we don't have to get this perfect. We can kind of just test out the effect and really kind of have fun with it. And maybe we keep it, maybe we don't. We can apply this all over the place, but, it's probably good to stay in this spot for a little bit and get enough of it in place. I can scale down the brush and get in some of these little tiny highlights and add a little bit more variation to it. Now, the beauty of adding another layer over top to me is this, that you can really experiment. So you can get in here and throw a little bit of this highlight over here. You can grab the blending brush and see what it looks like if you blend the highlight into the existing area of stuff. You're not hitting any of that other stuff. You're just affecting this new highlight that you're adding. So I can be real experimental with that and just kind of dance around it and throw stuff in, and I don't have to worry too much. I got my undos and I've got my ability to erase back. And so there's a lot of freedom to paint like this. And then once you're happy with it and you're committed to it, you merge it down just so you don't get a ton of extra layers, but I don't know. You got to get a lot of layers before it really starts bogging down. Well, at least my system. I don't know what you're working with, but my system, I can run a lot of layers before it really starts to affect. The main thing that layers will slow me down with is the sifting through them, trying to figure out where I'm at in my painting. So that's the reason why I recommend not having too many layers going on or creating groups once you get pretty layer intensive. So I'm adding a little bits of like little, bits and pieces. And keep in mind, I can also drop the opacity of the brush if I want to and add just really light kind of highlights, because this is where, you can really start to bump up the effect that the armor is kind of has this thing going on. That it's a little more depthy and the artwork's more intense. Now, if it looks a little bit too reddish, which I think it does, like I almost need to incorporate some of that over here. But here I'm getting a bit more of a yellow. So let me do this. Let me take and add a little bit more to this, just here and there, just so I don't know. I feel like I need to add a little bit more of this in parts of this, just to bump up the texture a little bit. Okay, and let's call that good for this part. So let me see what we got here. Let's pan back, check the work. Yeah, and I like that. Now, if I felt like it was a little bit too strong, like for instance, I want a stronger highlight on this arm. I feel like the light source would be a little bit brighter. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but that's what I'm aiming for. So that's what I'm going to go with. So if I take this and I tone it back opacity wise, I can see the difference. If I like it brighter and more saturated, I can also play with the saturation of just this highlight if I needed to by going to hue saturation and jumping it back here. So there's just a lot of freedom to what I can do with. I can overly saturate it, but it's not showing much of an effect there. But you just want to get in the habit of realizing that with layers, you can do a lot of cool stuff like that. So let's hit Command E, go ahead and merge that down, and let's try to dodge the effect right on the existing layer. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with using the dodge tool yet, and you're still kind of getting used to it, just hit Command J and make a copy of this layer. This is the dodge tool. I'll set it to highlights for this particular deal. And what I'm trying to do is I want to bring out some of this nice glare that you get off the metal like that. And the dodge tool is really great for that. And this is the part I was talking about where some of this texture that you couldn't quite see starts to kind of come out here. So that's where building up textures can be really kind of a neat effect, because you don't always see it as much until you start to do things like this, and then you start to realize, oh wow, there's all these cool little bits and pieces that I can see a little bit better now. And some of it you don't want to be fully visible because you're trying to place shadows. So you got to be, I think, a little bit careful with this tool. It's kind of addicting, I think. Like I think it looks really cool, so I want to like hit it, large glare there, large glare here, large glare there, and then all of a sudden it doesn't have the same impact. So you got to be real sparingly with the effect. Now the other neat thing about copying it with Command J and doing it is that you can put some of this in place, and again, you can toggle this layer on and off and just check the work, check the effect before you commit to it. And that's pretty much how I paint through a lot of the way. I mean, there's a lot of little things that happen as you go through it, but that's essentially how I work through each part of this. And then I might get bored of this area for a bit or think it's good enough for now, and then jump over to another segment. And that's probably the only bad thing about something that's a little bit more detailed, because there's just a lot of little things to detail. But that's where, getting better at your paint work and being able to apply just the right amount of detail to certain areas is so important. That's what really great painters figure out. Hopefully we'll all get there. And then that's what allows you to not only complete pieces a lot faster, but just ultimately have these pieces that are just highly impressive, because they know just where to add the detail, where to direct the viewer's eye, and make just something that's just amazing. So so hopefully this video has helped you with a few of those questions that I get from people, as far as like how to add details, how to work with layers, and that's just some of the ways that I do it. Obviously if I go on and on and on. Videos like this could just be hours long because some of this stuff, these projects take me hours to complete. This one right here, I think I probably got, I'm probably almost into the 8 hour mark right here. And I generally don't do that. I think a little bit of it was me kind of fighting the process a bit. Um, and I don't know that it was 8, but it's a lot longer. Like generally by 8, I'm pretty much done with a piece, putting that baby to bed and moving on to something else. In this one, I still feel like I got another few hours of rendering the work and trying to get it the way that I want to see it. So that does happen at times. It just depends on your comfort level of a certain character. This is the first time I've ever done this character, so I think that's a little bit of it. I kind of underestimated all the little details in the character design, and I think I'm rendering things a little bit more all over the place than I normally would, but I just really want to see it look pretty cool. So that's kind of my only explanation for that. But yeah, so hopefully this video, like I said, has been helpful to you. If it has, be sure to let me know. Let me know what you like, what you don't, so I can always continually improve the channel here. Keep in mind that you can get my brushes on my Gumroad, and if you want certain brushes, to let me know, and I'll work on those for you in my spare time. And as always, keep drawing, keep painting, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon. So thanks for watching.